The phenomenon of foreign corporations setting up shop in African countries and ruthlessly exploiting available human and natural resources is a mainstay of modern African history. After all, colonialism, the event that has defined African history for the last 150 years, was this kind of hostile takeover at scale. Never mind the rhetoric about development and democracy. Historically, most communities across the continent have been unable to resist these incursions. The numerous foreign-owned oil rigs, mines, logging outfits, dams, plantations, and other such enterprises across the continent attest to this. Quite often, the foreign entities are backed by the national government, and the extractive initiatives are presented wrapped up in promises of economic growth and progress. It would be dishonest to assert that none of these initiatives have delivered on their promise of transformation and wealth creation. There are thousands of Africans whose lives have been made better from the presence of these corporations and their activities. However, the proportion of what is taken versus what is ultimately given back as promised is almost always out of balance. Even more, and quite often, the resulting damage from the taking far outweighs any benefits. In the last episode, we examined the case of Kenya's Chonyi people's fight and ultimate victory in preventing a cement plant from being established on their ancestral lands. We ended the episode with a reflection on how us modern Africans will move into a future which demands land and other natural resources to support much needed economic development. Another question one could ask is that of what attitude modern Africans could adopt to ensure that the same exploitative and extractive attitudes we condemn in foreign entities don't poison our own activities. And so in this week's episode, we go to Ghana's Atlantic coast to examine yet another case of foreign exploitation and explore how traditional beliefs might offer a pathway to more sustainable development. Hello, friends, and welcome to the Mythological Africans podcast, where we read and talk about stories from African mythology and folklore. I am your host, Helen Mbe. In April of this year, the Ghanaian Fishing Ministry suspended fishing licenses for 4 vessels operating in Ghanaian national waters. The vessels, most of them owned and operated by foreign corporations, had been engaging in what is known as bottom trawling. Bottom trawling is a destructive fishing practice in which beams of metal are used to scrape along the seabed and then large nets pass through to gather up everything that comes up. Bottom trawling is harmful for 3 main reasons. First, the gear, the metal beams and nets, come into contact with the seabed and so damage the habitat of the marine organisms that live there. Now, this is not a problem for sandy or muddy seabeds in shallow waters. Their regular exposure to the disturbances caused by strong waves and storms makes these areas more resistant to such damage. This is not the case, however, in parts of the sea and ocean, where fragile, long-lived or slow-growing species like corals and sea pens live. These habitats can be permanently damaged by bottom trawling. Second, bottom trawling is indiscriminate in what it catches, and so there is a lot of unwanted catch, or bycatch as it's called. When this includes non-target species like birds, mammals, amphibians, and reptiles, or young, undersized fish, they are often just left to die, then they are thrown away. And as you can imagine, this does not bode well for the sustainability of the practice or the wider ecosystem. Third, the practice threatens the livelihoods of African fishing communities. The large boats used by the trawlers collide with the fishermen's canoes, sometimes killing them. Another time, the trawling gear will destroy their nets, which can be very expensive to replace. Now, there are ways to avoid the harms of bottom trawling. In well-regulated fishing environments, places with sensitive marine ecosystems are protected from trawling, and the activity itself is limited to specific areas. Also, companies are required to demonstrate that they have taken the necessary precautions and have the appropriate gear to prevent non-target species from being caught up in their trawling nets. Companies are also encouraged to cooperate with and respect indigenous customs, and this is sometimes enforced with regulations. What happens, however, when regulations are laxed or not enforced, and the motivation to catch more fish outweighs the requirement to protect the ecosystem and obey the law? I first heard about bottom trawling after artisanal fishermen in Limbe, the town where I went to school in Cameroon, West Africa, organized a strike to protest the activities of Chinese trawlers who they accused of decimating populations of fish and other marine species. Similar protests have happened up and down the West African coast, where fleets of trawlers, usually Chinese-owned but operated with African partners, patrol the waters. These fishing vessels are notorious for engaging in illegal, unreported, and unregulated, also known as IUU fishing. And by some accounts, 20% of all IUU catch around the whole world comes from just 6 West African countries: Mauritania, Senegal, the Gambia, Guinea-Bissau, Guinea, and Sierra Leone. And I should note that many of these countries, Senegal and Liberia, if I remember correctly, have passed very strict laws to prevent these from continuing. Unsurprisingly, many of these reports also include accounts of incidents, conflict between the people who run these trawlers and the African fishermen. In Ghana, the men working on the trawlers report being trapped on the vessels with little to no recourse for any abuses inflicted on them. They are subjected to extreme working hours, verbal abuse, physical abuse. They refuse pay. They're not given adequate food, water, or medical support. The vibe, if we can call it that, around bottom trawling and other industrial fishing activities is quite different from what obtains in African fishing communities. And my intention here is not to romanticize traditional African approaches or act like they don't have shortcomings of their own. However, it's hard to compare the two ways of doing fishing and not see how one makes for more harmonious and sustainable livelihoods and the other does not. We'll focus on Ghana in this episode since I found a decent amount of material to work with from the country. Now, fishing in Ghanaian coastal communities, it's more than a livelihood, it's a way of life. The rhythms of fishing-related activities and the relationship it requires with the ocean is evident in the way the communities are structured. Perhaps because of the demands it makes on time and physical strength, fishing in these communities is primarily work for men. The fishermen set sail early in the morning, usually between 1 and 2 a.m. They sail out in vessels of various sizes. Some are relatively small dugout canoes able to accommodate just about 6 people, and others are large vessels able to hold 20 to 40 people. They sail far out into the waters, cast their nets, and remain on the waters for several hours before pulling on the ropes to gather the nets. This uphauling can last up to 3 or 6 hours, and larger vessels can stay on the waters for weeks, up to a month. In smaller vessels, each fisherman is responsible for his catch, even though they help each other and contribute to the vessel's upkeep. In larger vessels, rank and seniority determine what each crew member gets, but the owner of the vessel, of course, gets the largest share. Upon their return to the shore, the fishermen are met by relatives, usually women, who help them sort the catch. And then the fish is given to these fisherwomen on credit. They take them to the market, sell them, and then give the fishermen an agreed upon sum. The whole enterprise is underpinned by a complex system of values and customs and associated folklore. First, there is the orientation that the people have about bodies of water. The Akan people are Ghana's largest ethnic group, and their land also borders most of the country's coastline. And to the Akan people, bodies of water, like rivers, lake, and the ocean, are children of the Supreme Being, Yame. These bodies of water are venerated as life-giving and life-sustaining forces. Matter of fact, in these coastal fishing communities, depending on who you ask, the ocean is either father or mother of the people. Among the Ahanta and Akan people in Ghana's western region, the ocean is Nana Bosompo, a benevolent father who provides food and a means of livelihood to his children. The ocean is also a mother who births a multitude of creatures and offers them to her human children for food. That's why she's addressed as Ye Mame Pa Oma Yen Etiban, or our mother who feeds us. There are other lesser deities associated with the ocean like Nana Bokwa, Nana Bebo Arizi, and, of course, Mame Wata. Right relationship with each of them is required for success in both fishing and peaceful community life. Here's a funny story. The name Nana Bebo Arizi is the name of the deity venerated by the Nzema, who are another coastal Akan people. But the name is inspired by the story of an encounter between Arizi, a Nzema man, and the dwarf-like creatures who serve as guards and messengers for the gods. It is said that there was an island off the coast on which the deity lived and which was forbidden to humans on a particular day because it was a sacred day for the god. But Arizi, this man, decided to defy the gods, so he got in his boat and sailed off to the island on the forbidden day. But as soon as he stepped on the shores, he was caught and viciously beaten by the dwarfs. And so from then on, the island god was known as Bebo Arizi, which in the Nzema language means Arizi was beaten by the dwarfs on the island. The ocean is also understood to be a powerful entity with expectations for how humans should engage it, and there are dire consequences for those who err. For example, all fishing activities are prohibited on Tuesdays. This is a sacred day for the ocean and rest for the fishing community. If Tuesday met a fisherman on the waters, he could stay till the next day without penalty, but if he chose to come home, he wasn't allowed to sell any of his catch. Violators are punished with fines or even reported to the police, which I think is interesting. What is even more interesting is that these expectations about engagements with the ocean extend to human relationships. Fishermen are expected to maintain harmonious relationships with each other, with their families, and the wider community if they are to have successful catches. And as you can imagine, this is intended to discourage exploitative and abusive practices. Fishing communities are also expected to take only what they need from the ocean, and certain species like the whale are never to be caught. The whale, or bonsu, is a powerful deity and totem. Their flesh is forbidden, and when a dead whale is found, communities will organize funerals for them. This prohibiting on overfishing is noteworthy, especially in the context of bottom trawling, which is overfishing on steroid. Amongst the coastal Akan people, overfishing is so taboo. In fact, according to one legend, women violated this rule and so have been excluded, though not prohibited, from fishing ever since. The story goes that some women went fishing and had a large catch, so large in fact that their boat could not carry it all. But instead of throwing part of the catch back into the ocean, as custom demanded, the women tried to sail home with the catch, and this caused their boat to capsize and all the women to drown. There are other stories which explain why women are excluded from fishing in some areas, and these have to do with the fact that the ocean is supposed to be kept ritually pure, and a menstruating woman threatens this purity. This is a wider context where the ocean is treated as this sacred entity, and so it should not be desecrated in any way. So what we see from the fishing practices of coastal Ghanaian communities is a model in which the ocean is not just a resource for the people to exploit and extract from. The people cultivate a relationship with the ocean, and this relationship is ultimately informed by and preserved through lore, values, practices, and customs. This setup is not static, nonetheless. Times are changing. Traditional beliefs are under pressure from Christianity, Islam, and secular culture, and the prospect of more lucrative partnerships, sometimes with foreign investors, looms ever large. And so, what does the future hold? This is for the people themselves to decide. But I hope they never forget the possibility of a different kind of relationship, one motivated by the well being of the people and the ocean, one in which good relationships, rest, and respect for different life forms is prioritized. We'll be back next week with more. Meanwhile, you can check the episode notes for further reading recommendations. Thank you as always for listening.